Hi, I'm Acrylic, and today's video is going to be a little different compared to my first two. No, those don't count. That's like pre-Jira. That's like a whole different era. Unlike my first two videos, this video won't be focusing on a program I've made, but trust me, it'll still be good. Now, a little over a month ago, I celebrated my birthday. Thank you for that, Jira. One of the gifts I received for my birthday was a Nintendo Switch 2 bundled with the new Mario Kart World. Awesome, right? Except Mario Kart was a digital download, so I had to wait for that to install. While I was waiting, I decided to take a trip through the system settings, and that's when I came across a new feature. You've already read the title of the video. They added webcam support to the Switch 2. What is it used for? I don't know, but it gave me a great idea. Why not bring Nintendo's first camera all the way up to their newest console? That camera being the Game Boy camera. But how are you gonna do that? I don't know if you've noticed, but that cartridge doesn't exactly fit into a USB port, which is why that's not what we're doing. Instead, we're going to use the SNES and the power of a capture card. First, you get out your SNES and insert the Super Game Boy cartridge into it. The Super Game Boy was an adapter cartridge Nintendo released that allowed you to play Game Boy games on an SNES. So now, Jira can play her Pokemon Red save on the big screen. But unlike Jira, we're not going to be using Pokemon Red. We're going to be using the Game Boy camera. Now, instead of plugging the video output into a TV, we're going to run it through an RCA to USB capture card. All you have to do now is just plug the USB side into the Switch 2's dock. So let's go try this out. Okay, well, you also need to plug in a controller so you can actually navigate your way through the menus. And boom! Now we're using a camera made for the Game Boy on Nintendo's newest hardware. But why does this work? Why does the Switch 2 recognize our capture card as a webcam? I'll try and explain this to the best of my understanding. USB webcams use a device class called UVC, which stands for USB Video Class. Device classes are how a computer, or in our case, a Switch 2, knows how to handle a USB device. It's why when you plug in a controller, it doesn't get treated as a keyboard, since they use different device classes. When the Switch 2 recognizes something as using UVC, it treats it as a webcam. But along with webcams, capture cards also use the USB video class, so when you connect one to a Switch 2, it also gets treated as a webcam. We've already established that through the SNES and the Super Game Boy, we can use the Game Boy camera. But if we take a step back, we realize that that means we can also use any Game Boy game as our webcam. And if we take another step back, we realize that we can also use any SNES game as our webcam. And if we take another step back, yeah, I've already overused that line, haven't I? We realize that anything that uses RCA cables can be used as a webcam through the use of our capture card. So let's do a speed round. Through our capture card, we can use the NES, the SNES, and by extension Game Boy games through the use of the Super Game Boy, the N64, the GameCube, and by extension Game Boy Advance games through the use of the Game Boy Player, and the Wii, all as our webcam. Pretty broad collection, but why'd we stop at the Wii? Well, because after the Wii, Nintendo switched to using HDMI for their console's video output. So now what? We just use another capture card that's made for HDMI. Let's pick up where we left off and try it with the Wii U. We've run the Wii U through the capture card, and then plugged the capture card into the Switch 2, and it doesn't work. Why not? Well, it's because our capture card isn't compatible with the Switch 2. The Switch 2 dock has two USB ports, both USB 2.0 compatible. The capture card I tried to use was the Elgato HD60S, which requires USB 3.0 to work. Think of it like this. Jira has a decent amount of strength and speed. If we ask her to hold a rubber duck, she can do it. And if we ask her to move this shield from one point to another, she can also do it. Jira is our USB 2.0 port in this scenario, with her holding the rubber duck representing how much power our USB port can supply, and her moving the shield representing how fast our USB port can transfer data. Now let's make both the rubber duck and the shield heavier. Now when Jira tries to hold the rubber duck, she fails to keep it up. And when she tries to move the shield, she's going way slower. Jira's failure to lift the rubber duck due to its increased weight represents how our USB port can't supply enough power to our device. Similarly, Jira's struggle to move the shield represents how our USB port can't transfer data as fast as we need it to. The fix for this would be a buffer, faster Jira that can handle the weight of the duck and the shield. This hypothetical buff Jira is USB 3.0. So then, what do? We just buy a different capture card that requires a little less. If we try the same process again using our new capture card, you can see it now works. Okay, let's take a little pit stop real quick. If you want to try this for yourself, but don't want to accidentally get a capture card that's not compatible, I've linked the ones I use in this video in the description below. Also, if you like the video so far, leave a like, and maybe even subscribe. Also, consider becoming a channel member. Becoming a tier 1 channel member comes with an exclusive role in the Discord server, discord.gg/Jira. Behind the scenes content, priority replies to your comments, and having your name listed at the end of the videos. Becoming a tier 2 channel member gives you access to all of that, plus more perks, like members only polls, discounts on merch, and members only videos, such as Q&As. If you're not convinced and think the deal can be sweetened, come talk to me in the Discord server. That's discord.gg/Jira, by the way. I'm new to memberships as a whole, so I'm very open to changes. Okay, let's get back to the video now. So now we can use anything that uses HDMI cables as our webcam. So let's do another speed round. Through our second capture card, we can use the Wii U, the Switch, the NES Classic, the SNES Classic, the Famicom Classic, and even another Switch 2 all as our webcam. Why isn't there any footage for that last one, you ask? Because I only have one Switch 2. What am I, made of money? What if instead of a second Switch 2, we just use the same Switch 2 as its own webcam? To do this, we'll need need to use two HDMI capture cards. For the second one, I'm going to be using my previously mentioned Elgato HD60S, but if you're doing this from home, just buy the capture card linked in the description twice. First, we run our Switch 2's video output through our second HDMI capture card with the other end connecting to our computer. Then, using OBS, we're going to create a scene that shows the video output of the capture card. After that, we run an HDMI cable through our computer, just like if you were connecting to a monitor, but instead of a monitor, we're going to plug it into our first HDMI capture card, with the other side still plugged into the Switch 2. When you do this, your computer will treat this new connection as a monitor, which, depending on your device settings, changes the next step. If your system sets it to mirror a display, then you'll want to go into OBS and full screen a preview of our scene onto the monitor that it's mirroring. If your system sets it to be its own display, then you'll want to go into OBS and full screen a preview of our scene to that display. After doing all that, we get this. Yeah, it just repeats in on itself, but if you were, say, using this in a game, your webcam would basically act as a screen share of your POV. But wait a second, to do that, didn't we also end up using a computer as our webcam? You would be correct, we did, and that opens up even more possibilities for us. There's the obvious choice of just using it to screen share your computer, but that's boring. Let's do more. Through this, you can use a VTuber, PNG tuber, and even like a highway camera or something, all as your webcam. We can also go back and fix the aspect ratio for some of those earlier consoles. Now, instead of it being all stretched out, we have the Game Boy camera as our webcam at its intended aspect ratio. Now for the obvious two questions. Can it run Doom, and can it play Bad Apple? Well, here it is running Doom, except the Switch 2 isn't actually the one running it. Doom is just running on my computer, which is then displayed on the Switch 2. As for Bad Apple, it's the same scenario. The video is being played on my computer, which is then displayed onto the Switch 2. Do either of those count? That's up for you to decide. So what's next? Well, why don't we try something that most people have? An iPhone. Yeah, sorry to the Android users, but I don't own one, so it didn't make the cut. Now you may or may not know this, but iPhones actually support video output. All we need to do to use this as our webcam is plug our iPhone into one end of a Lightning to HDMI adapter cable, then plug the other end into our capture card, and then plug the other end of the capture card into the Switch 2. And just like that, we're using our iPhone as a webcam. But wait, isn't that a little unnecessary? Instead of converting it from Lightning to HDMI to USB-C, why don't we just go straight from Lightning to USB-C? Well, because most Lightning to USB-C cables are meant for charging, so if we were to use one of those cables instead, it would just end up charging our phone. Think back to what I said earlier about device classes. Now, are there Lightning to USB-C cables intended for video output? Yeah, probably, but I'd recommend you just take the longer route and keep that extra step. So what are our options now that we have it as our webcam? Well, we can screen share, and that's about it. Nah, I'm playing. We got quite a few options. Using Apple's built-in camera app, we can use the front camera in both portrait and landscape mode, along with the back camera also in both portrait and landscape mode as our webcam. But there's some clutter on the sides, and we don't want that. Using an app like TrueVisage, we can use our camera without all the extra clutter. Once again, being able to use the front camera in both portrait and landscape mode, and the back camera also in both portrait and landscape mode as our webcam. On top of that, we can also mirror the camera if we want. If that wasn't to your liking, we can also do something a little sillier. Using Snapchat, we can use both AR filters and face filters as our webcam. Unfortunately, this brings back the clutter issue, but hey, at least we get a silly monkey out of it. Okay, that last section was a little too practical, minus maybe the Snapchat part. Let's use something weirder. What about an Xbox 360 Kinect? Out of everything we've done so far, this is by far the hardest one to set up, which doesn't really mean much because everything else was really easy. We plug the Kinect into our computer, then our computer into our capture card, and finally, our capture card into the Switch 2. Except, there's more to it than that. To use the Kinect on our computer, we need to install its drivers. Installing the drivers also comes with this app, the Developer Toolkit browser. From here, you can choose from one of the various samples and then capture it with OBS for our Switch 2 to use as our webcam. So let's try one and see it in action. And would you look at that? We're using the Xbox 360 Kinect as our webcam. This is the Color Basics D2D sample, which basically just works like a normal camera, but we can get a little more abstract. This is the Depth Basics D2D sample. What's its purpose? Like depth mapping or something, I don't know. All that matters is that we can use it as our webcam. Next, we have the Depth D3D sample, which also maps depth or something. Doesn't matter. Look, I changed colors. Let's do one last sample before we move on. This is the Skeleton Basics D2D sample, which tracks our movement, and pretty accurately at that. Oh wait, what's he doing? Ooh, kill him. Ooh, kill him. Ooh. The Kinect was pretty cool. How do we possibly top that? Well, do I have a treat for you. It's something crazier than the Kinect. It's the reason this video was even made, and it's probably the reason you even clicked on this video in the first place. We are going to use a Joy-Con as our webcam. Yes, I am serious. A little known feature about the Nintendo Switch is that on the bottom of the right Joy-Con lies an IR camera. It was very underutilized, and barely any games used it. So let's make it up to the poor IR camera and finally give it a purpose. That purpose being to serve as our webcam. Using a software called Joy-Con Toolkit, we can view the IR camera of any Joy-Con connected to our computer. So here's the setup. We connect our Joy-Con to our computer where we can view the IR camera. We then capture this IR output using OBS. From here, it's the same process that we've done many times before. Plug our computer into the capture card and then plug our capture card into the Switch 2. After that process, we can now say that we are using a Joy-Con of all things as our webcam. And no, that is not a still image I'm showing you. That is a video. The frame rate is actually just that bad. Here, let's watch. Yeah, that took way too long. The frame rate correlates to the resolution of the IR camera. The higher the resolution, the lower the frame rate. The lower the resolution, the higher the frame rate. For the sake of this showcase, I'll just settle somewhere in the middle. There's a couple different color options to choose from, so let's go through them. First, we have grayscale, which, as the name implies, puts everything in grayscale. Next, we have night vision, which, despite the name, is not any better at seeing in the dark than the other options are. Then, we have iron bow, which should look familiar because we've already tried this one. And finally, we have infrared, which, based on the last 3 letters of the name, is pretty accurate. So to answer the question, what can you use as a webcam on a Nintendo Switch 2? Basically anything. The only requirement is that it has some sort of video output. But that's it for the video. It was a little different from my last 2, but I hope you enjoyed it nonetheless. Everybody say thank you, Salami. I couldn't have done it without her. Also, that Teto video did really well. So I wanted to go ahead and announce that yes, there will be a part 2. At some point. I want to diversify my content a little more before I loop back to any previous videos and make sequels, so that means Teto Part 2 will be put on the back burner for a bit. Jira, don't give me that look. Wait, you did like nothing this video. Yeah, I'm definitely putting you to work for the next one. What? Don't hit my captions! See, now it's stuck there. Give me a second. Okay, now let's wave the audience goodbye. See you next time. Surprise, I'm still here. Yeah, that empty space over there is where I would put my channel members, but I don't have any yet, so I'll just take this time to shout out Spaceman from the Discord server.